Welcome to Simply by Deal HQ. On this podcast, we engage thought leaders on topical issues around law and business in the most simplistic manner.
Hello everyone, welcome to episode 5 season 2 of Simply by Deal HQ. I'm Michael Popoola, an associate at Deal HQ Partners, and on today's episode, we'll be focusing on the burning need to position Africa as a key player in the global semiconductor industry. As you may know, the semiconductor industry is the backbone of all modern technology and has come to be commonly referred to as the brainbox of all modern innovation. The industry has propelled the emergence of the fourth industrial revolution through critical breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, automation, cloud computing, big data, robotics, the Internet of Things, and biotechnology. Even if you didn't know anything about this industry previously, I'm sure the name NVIDIA rings a bell. The semiconductor industry is a $1 trillion industry with a compounded annual growth rate of approximately 9% and has become a major economic driver for countries like Taiwan, South Korea, China, Japan, and the United States. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company produces about 90% of the world's super advanced semiconductors and supplies major technological giants like Apple and Nvidia. South Korea's Samsung is the leading producer of memory chips, while the United States continues to lead in semiconductor design and development, with prominent companies such as Intel and Qualcomm at the forefront of this innovation. Despite the growing demand for semiconductor products and exceptional performance of semiconductor companies on the global stock market, Africa's involvement in the sector remains minuscule. Only a few African countries, such as South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, and more recently Nigeria, have recorded modest levels of participation. On today's episode, we are joined by Mr. Ola Fadiran, one of the pioneers of innovation, training, research, and development in Africa's growing semiconductor industry and the CEO of Chipmango. Mr. Fadiran is dedicated to bridging the talent gap within the African semiconductor industry. Thank you so much, Mr. Fadiran, for agreeing to join us. It's an honor and a privilege to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's my honor. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you very much, sir. Now that introductions are done, permit me to jump to the first question. One of our objectives on Simply is to simplify complex concepts for the benefit of our listeners. Mr. Fadiran, can you please provide a simplistic overview of the semiconductor industry? Basically, what semiconductors are, how they are produced, and the role that they play in today's technological-driven world.
Yeah, sure. So, semiconductors have never been as important as they are today. We're seeing so many applications that use semiconductors. But what exactly are semiconductors? So semiconductors are essential components that power all modern electronic devices. Your phone, the laptops, all devices, planes, airplanes. You think of it, anything that's smart, as many semiconductors in it. And when you think about a semiconductor, you're really looking at its material that falls somewhere between a conductor and an insulator. And, these are essentially used for making electrical components. The fact that there's somewhere in between the conductor and insulator really makes them ideal for controlling electrical currents. The primary ingredient in the semiconductor is silicon. And, you take silicon through many intricate steps, such as purifying, you create the wafers. You do what's called etching. You etch patterns on the wafers, and there are lots of advanced processes like advanced lithography that goes into the formation of these integrated circuits. This is what we know as microchips. And microchips are the brains behind everything that we use today, from smartphones and computers, cars, medical devices, you name it. In today's world, semiconductors are really foundational to all technological advancement. More recent ones, artificial intelligence. You mentioned NVIDIA. I would mention also AMD, Broadcom, of course, OpenAI, the Microsofts, the Facebooks. Everyone is really trying to capitalize on the semiconductor technology to push the limits on artificial intelligence. Some applications were already used to, like cloud computing, IoT. These have been the brainchild. Semiconductors have really been what's pushing the cloud computing and IoT in the background. So there's never been an important time as now to be discussing or to be in the semiconductor space.
As you said earlier, Mr. Fadiran, the semiconductor industry has never been this important. However, it's currently one of the fastest growing industries in the world, valued at approximately $700 billion. We also have amongst the top 10 companies in the world are NVIDIA Corporation and the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company Limited, which are both semiconductor companies. What factors, in your opinion, sir, have contributed to the growth and success of these companies and the global semiconductor industry at large?
Yeah, so the global semiconductor industry, as you know, is becoming more and more popular, like you said, with the emergence of NVIDIA being the forefront. I think a lot of that is due to the stock, NVIDIA stock, which just seems to keep going up. But really, when you go down into it, what is really driving the global semiconductor industry is one, innovation, two, the economies of scale, and then the strategic investments in R&D. We see heavy investment. So I'll talk about those one at a time. So, with innovation, actually, and strategic investments in R&D all come together. But we've not seen nearly as much innovation as we see today in this space. NVIDIA is constantly, releasing new technology. Companies like AMD, Broadcom, they're releasing new AI chips and working, on R&D in this space for many years. Semiconductors are used in multiple devices, so they benefit from the economies of scale. And so when you design a chip, you expect that chip to be used in numerous applications. And so that actually is what's driving the emergence of the global semiconductor industry. I'll use NVIDIA as an example. So NVIDIA is driven by its focus on GPUs. For a long time, CPUs, which is the architecture for the computers, which is more serial computing. GPUs is more parallel, so you're doing many more computations in parallel. And NVIDIA focused on GPUs, and for a very long time, the focus was on CPUs. However, it became obvious that NVIDIA's chips were originally architected for the gaming ecosystem and for visualization, happened to be perfect for AI. And as you know, AI is what's driving the emerging economy. So NVIDIA chips are focusing on GPU, are very pertinent, important to AI and data centers. And with the initial success, NVIDIA continues to innovate. They're innovating on the GPU architecture. They're innovating on the software layer that goes with that. I think, it's called CUDA. And this strategic pivot to AI computing is really what has set NVIDIA apart. TSMC, on the other end, TSMC is the leader in the manufacturing process. And TSMC has focused solely on manufacturing. I think this has enabled them to be successful. They're what you call a pure play foundry. And this allows them to work with big clients like Apple, Qualcomm, and others without much competition. TSMC continues to lead in terms of the technology for the manufacturing, and TSMC heavily invests in R&D. Of course, an industry being as big as semiconductor industry, you really need government support. So both these companies, NVIDIA and TSMC, have also benefited from government policies in the countries that they're in. And as the world is now focuses more and more on semiconductors, we're seeing, more and more of these government policies like the CHIPS Act. And there are acts in virtually every continent and in many countries that is providing good support for the likes of NVIDIA and TSMC.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question. Despite having large deposits of silica sand and rare earth metals, which are primary materials for manufacturing semiconductors, Africa accounts for less than 1% of the global market share and is at the very bottom of the industry value chain. What factors, do you think are contributory to the nascency of Africa's semiconductor market, and what drivers do you think have the capacity to bolster the much-needed growth in this industry?
So Africa's semiconductor market is at its infancy, and this is due to several challenges. One is limited infrastructure. Then there's a severe skills gap, and then we don't have nearly as much investment in R&D in this space. So all those three factors combined together is actually contributing to, I would say, the slow progress of Africa's semiconductor market. However, with that, we still have key players in Africa that looking at the semiconductor manufacturing, and I've actually made some progress. We have STL, Semiconductor Technologies Limited in Kenya, that is making good strides in this space. I think they recently got a grant from USTDA to do a feasibility study. And we have Amaltech in Nigeria that's also investing heavily and looking to change the game in Africa when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing. In Africa, there is in some parts, I don't want to say in all of Africa, but we tend to see places with some political instability, and there is also limited support from the government in terms of policy that would help to grow what is the Africa semiconductor market. But then on the other hand, we all know that Africa has the rich deposits of the rare materials that's critical for semiconductor production. And Africa also has a young, vibrant, growing population. So the positives, the raw materials and the population, of course, the negatives, infrastructure, skills gap, insufficient R&D. Now, in order for us to drive growth in Africa, there needs to be a concerted effort to build the local capacity through education, strategic partnerships with the global semiconductor companies, and government policies that would foster innovation and attract investment. So all these actually have to happen in parallel. You can't have just one of these without the others. That wouldn't lead to growth. So at Chipmango, we're actually pioneering this. A big focus of ours is in establishing training programs that will be crucial to upskill the young and vibrant growing population of Africa. And this would actually make Africa to become a competitive player in the semiconductor industry.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. So, still on the African perspective, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the AfCFTA, which aims to boost Africa's economic growth by promoting regional integration, removing trade barriers, and encouraging intra-African trade in goods and services, has a digital trade protocol. This digital trade protocol is a blueprint for Africa's digital future. and aims to harness the power of digital technology for sustainable development. In your opinion, sir, how critical is the development of our semiconductor industry to the timely realization of the digital trade protocol on the one hand, and sustainable economic development for Africa on the other hand?
So the development of Africa's semiconductor industry is vital, is absolutely critical to the continent's digital future and also to sustainable economic growth. Semiconductors really is the backbone of all digital technology. We see the interfaces, the UIs, we see the software, but what's really doing the work in the background are the microchips. The microchips on the laptops or the phones is what's enabling you to be able to view your screen. The microchips in the servers is what's enabling the computation that happens in the cloud. So there's really no way to have a vibrant digital economy without understanding the fundamental building blocks, which is the microchips. So semiconductors are crucial for implementing that the digital trade protocol. And how would this happen? So they will enable the creation of the local digital solutions that address Africa's unique challenges. When a chip is designed or developed, say in the US, for example, or in Europe, for example, when you're developing the chips, you develop it based off of the requirements and the specifications, which that comes from the specific use case and from that specific customer. So you can easily see why it's important for Africa to develop its own capability, because we would never really solve problems in Africa or build semiconductor microchips that are tailored to solve Africa problems without having the capability to do so. What would Africa would be stuck with is, repurposing existing chips, maybe they're built in China or built somewhere else, and repurposing it to solve Africa's unique problems. So absolutely, we need to have the semiconductor capability. Things like mobile banking, e-health, smart agriculture, these are already matured spaces, matured ecosystems in Africa. And, all of those would benefit from a vibrant semiconductor industry. And then the other thing is innovation. Semiconductors is the building block for modern innovation, for smart systems, for AI. Semiconductors is behind all of that. So Africa's semiconductor industry would create a number of high-tech jobs, high-paying jobs. This would reduce the amount of youth that is trying to leave the continent in search of a better life. If they are paid better in these high-tech jobs, they would actually stay and innovate within the country or the continent. It would also reduce the dependency on imports. As we create more on the continent, would depend less on solutions that are built overseas. And overall, that would lead to a more self-reliant, a more independent Africa. And I think that's good for everyone.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fadiran. I very much agree that the development of bespoke semiconductor capabilities would help Africa to address a lot of problems that are peculiar to the continent, as well as remove the heavy reliance on the importation of technology developed overseas. And that leads me to my next question. With the emergence of the United States CHIPS Act of 2022, which imposes restrictions on the export of advanced semiconductor technologies to countries such as China and Russia, as well as China's decision to tighten export controls on germanium, graphite, and other key materials used to manufacture semiconductors. Do you see the world turning to Africa as an alternative market for raw materials? And is this Africa's chance to realize its ambition to develop its semiconductor industry?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like you mentioned, we're seeing something that I would say has never been seen before. The level of geopolitical tensions that we're seeing between U.S. and China in this space, it's presenting opportunities for many geographies. I think one of the great benefactors of the opportunity is India. We're seeing a lot of investment going into India. But when you take a step back and you look at it and what does global supply chain look like in this space, U.S. And China had a good relationship. Of course, that relationship is now sour. But U.S. also did a lot of work with India, especially in the front end design services, and there was a strong relationship there also. But there was China, there was India, and there was a vibrant semiconductor supply chain. Of course, with the pandemic, and we also saw what happened with the shortage of chips, how that drove the entire market. The world is now beginning to look to alternate sources for the supply chain other than China. I mentioned India is seeing more investment. Places like Vietnam are seeing more and more investment. Malaysia is also making moves to become an alternative. Africa has 1.6 billion people approximately. Well, not exactly that, but approximately. That's a lot of people. And as you know, Africa is a massive, massive continent. And Africa has the vast reserves for the key raw materials. So Africa has what it takes to be part of, not just part, to actually be a significant player in the semiconductor supply chain. I think there is no time better than now for African nations to band together and to make a collective effort to make a stake in the semiconductor industry. Now, value must be created, and to do that, the nations have to invest in refining the raw materials locally. So rather than exporting them raw, the infrastructure needs to be developed within African countries to actually refine them. They need to build the processing facilities, and they also need to develop the local talent that would manage the operations. Now, that's not an easy task, but it is possible, and there's no better time to do that than now. Now, we see investments in what I call old technology or old money, and African nations tend to, I would say, in my opinion, go towards what we know, but really the entire planet is moving in the semiconductor direction. All the key economies are making significant strides, like you said, with the CHIPS Act. China is investing heavily in this space. So Africa also needs to invest. I think a big part of this is actually negotiations, like trade negotiations. Africa should negotiate better in terms of trade agreements. And a good place to start is with the raw materials, which are there in Africa. We're seeing the emergence of investment in Africa with the USTDA award to Semiconductor Technologies Limited in Kenya to do a feasibility study on semiconductors. So we're beginning to see an emergence, and I just think more and more effort needs to be put into this space. We need to do more strategic partnerships with established semiconductor companies, because really the eye technology is with these companies, and the only way to really establish this vibrant economy in Africa is to have a partnership that involves some kind of technology transfer and capacity building. So now at Chipmango, we're focused on all these areas. We're establishing partnerships with semiconductor companies. We're building the capacity, and we're working to create education programs that can be used across Africa to bring that knowledge and know-how of the semiconductor industry right there into the continent.
So In terms of Africa's ambition to develop its semiconductor industry, we recently heard of a privately sponsored chips bill for Nigeria, which a lot of key industry stakeholders such as yourself and Nigerians in diaspora have promoted and are looking to push through the legislative houses for approval. Given the continent's current state of play in the global semiconductor market, do you believe that Nigeria is ripe for legislation in this area, or would this likely be counterintuitive in a country where the semiconductor industry is in a nascent stage, or is this a step in the right direction?
So the chips bill that we're working on for Nigeria is absolutely critical. So this year Nigeria released its AI strategy. Recently, South Africa also released one. I can see other countries in Africa releasing their AI strategy. I think the way things work in Africa is when Nigeria does something, or South Africa does something, or Kenya does something, then other leading economies in Africa, and I haven't mentioned all of them, but other economies tend to start looking at those things. A big part of semiconductor and microchips is, like I said, what makes TSMC and NVIDIA very successful is the scale. A semiconductor company in Africa can benefit from the scale that comes from integrating across the continent. So this needs to be a collective effort. The CHIPS bill would create legislation and policies to support the growth or the emergence of a semiconductor industry. And this would signal the government's commitment to developing the semiconductor sector. It would attract investments, and it would lay the groundwork for building critical infrastructure, which is needed for semiconductor manufacturing. This bill really cannot happen by itself. As you know, a big part of what needs to be done is actually investment in education, public and private partnerships. Those need to be effective. Now, it may seem early to be talking about a CHIPS bill, but really what makes it important and what makes it timely is that, the CHIPS bill serves as a catalyst. It serves as a catalyst for engagement of all critical stakeholders in Africa, and it leads to the creation of the legislative framework that will position Nigeria and Africa to begin to take advantage of future opportunities in the global semiconductor market.
Still on the Nigerian chips bill, there has been the age-long debate of regulation killing innovation. And as you've rightly said, there is a dearth of experienced professionals in this field on the African continent, and the continent still has a long way to go in terms of education. I would like to ask, what specific incentives or catalysts should we be looking for in a chips bill to promote the Nigeria and at large the continent's efforts on the semiconductor industry?
So for chips, when you look at what makes a vibrant semiconductor industry, there are two sides to it. There is the design, which is, I like to simply describe it as the software for hardware. And that's when you write the code that describes how the microchip behaves. And then there's the manufacturing. So design, think NVIDIA, Apple, AMD. Manufacturing, think TSMC, Global Foundries, Intel's, manufacturing. So for Nigeria and for Africa to have a vibrant semiconductor ecosystem, you have to see a double emergence of both manufacturing, and the design. The design is really how you can develop the local solutions in a way designed in Africa for Africa. And of course, the manufacturing is how the designs come into fruition. They have the physical representation of the design. So there needs to be heavy investment into building both the front end capability and the manufacturing capability. They need to happen side by side, all at once. We need to have the strong R&D institutions. And, this could be the top universities now beginning to look more and more into the semiconductor space. And this would really foster a skilled workforce. I mean, the education and training programs would have the advanced technology, the same level as what you could find anywhere else in the world. But that's what's needed. Now, a CHIPS bill, the initiatives would need to have components that foster each of these things that I've mentioned. There needs to be things in there that direct and supports the development of the R&D that's needed, and there needs to be a reappropriation of resources, heavy investment in manufacturing. Because this technology is so advanced, and there is so much intellectual property protection, and there's also so much trust that's built into the system, we need to see dominant public-private partnerships and collaborations with the global semiconductor companies. The likes of Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, and others, need to start looking at the continent as a possible destination for the investment. I'm actually quite bullish on Africa. I'm very optimistic about the future when it comes to semiconductors and also when it comes to the policy. I think with the right investments and with the right policies in place from the CHIPS bill, then Africa would gradually position itself as a key player in this semiconductor supply chain. And the components of the bill that would foster the front-end design, the manufacturing, research and development, education, upskilling the workforce, all these things together would then drive the economic growth, going into the next century. And so would empower the continent. And it would, again, it would lead to less reliance. As a continent, we'll be more and more capable to build our own AI infrastructure that is designed and tailored to solve Africa's problems.
Finally, Mr. Fadiran, having established that the semiconductor industry has a huge revenue potential and also offers the opportunity for African countries to create technology solutions made in Africa and for Africa, what is your general outlook on the African semiconductor industry going forward? I mean, we've already seen several countries on the continent release their national AI strategies. So what can we expect in terms of policies and trends?
Yeah, so, like you said, we're beginning to see an emergence. We're beginning to see what I would say the seeds being planted. And we're beginning to see a refocus on this space. With the USTDA award to STL, Semiconductor Technologies Limited in Kenya, and other agreements that we're seeing between the developed economies and Africa, I think there is a massive opportunity to tap into semiconductors. I'm very optimistic. With the AI policies, it becomes very clear that AI is a very important point for the emerging economies in Africa. Like Nigeria released its AI strategy, which I was actually a part of that. And South Africa shortly after released their own, and I think more and more African countries would also release their AI strategies. Now, semiconductors, microchips, it's really AI hardware. The software layer is built on top of the hardware layer, and so I can see that more and more focus will be placed on the semiconductors. I can see a potential refocus on building custom chips, low power, the low cost microchip alternatives, companies like eFabless, which is actually a US company, but has developed the technology that allows you to develop chips for a fraction and actually manufacture chips for the fraction of the cost. And they use some open source, and they develop a very, very critical and novel approach to building chips. I believe that would have a huge play. Things like that will have a huge play on the continent. And I actually can see, the development of chips that's entirely different from what we see right now. A lot of what we see right now are built, again, for other economies and for other continents. And so, as the infrastructure is growing within Africa, more and more unique designs would come into play. So I am very bullish about the continent. Chipmango is very bullish about the continent, and I am quite confident that things will start to emerge. We'll see more and more movement in this space on the continent.
Thank you, Mr. Fadiran, for making time out of your busy schedule to discuss with us today. We are glad to receive from your wealth of knowledge on the semiconductor industry. We would also like to say a very big thank you to our listeners for tuning in. As always, the conversation continues on our social media handles, so please remember to send us your comments and thoughts on today's episode.
Thank you. I'm glad to be a part of this.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is brought to you by Deal HQ Partners. To find out more about our services, visit www.dealhqpartners.com. See you on the next episode.